Thank you so much, Lori. And I'm really just excited to be here. My name is Karimah Edwards, and I'm the owner and principal of Humming Voices, which does business as Hummingbird Community Cooperation. And we're a small but mighty consulting firm focused on planning and planning from a space of anti-racism and belonging.
Thanks, Karimah, and happy to be here this afternoon and meet all of you. My name is Vinita Sidhu. I am one of the owners of Site Workshop. We're a landscape architecture firm based in Seattle. We work on a wide range of projects, a lot of them in the public realm, including public parks and schools. Within that, our work, we've done a lot of community engagement and are really proud of those processes and how they've enriched the work we do. So I'm going to mostly speak about one project today and just in general takeaways that I hope will be useful to all of you. And I will. So today we have inserted between our slides a few prompts and icebreakers, and we're hoping to keep this conversational and happy also to answer questions as we go rather than waiting all to the end. So if you have a question, put it in the chat and Lori will help prompt us to answer those. But first, one thing that would be helpful for us is to understand where you're all coming from, the organization, maybe, what organization you work with, and then why are you here at our talk today, and what are you hoping to get out of it? Whoever wants to share, if you're welcome to unmute or put something in the chat.
I'll jump in there. I love just starting these conversations out. I'm here today to learn about how we can engage marginalized communities in stormwater. I have a planning background, so I'm really, in the know about like why we should involve marginalized communities in housing production and affordable rent, and some of these bigger issues that are more top of mind for folks rather than like stormwater. That's managing stormwater and managing stormwater pollution is probably low on the priority list for folks that are just struggling to pay rent and put a roof over their head. So how do we tap into stormwater to help these communities out and also start building relationships? I think stormwater environmental education in general is a really good like gateway drug into other city services. So I'm really curious on like how we can build those connections and build relationships over something fun like stormwater and salmon. So curious to learn from that. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Does
Anyone else want to share? Yeah.
Lori,
Okay.
do we have anything in the chat?
Yes, we just received from Paige. Hi, everyone. I work for Douglas County Government in East Wenatchee. Community engagement means providing clear communication and helping people have a voice over the issues that affect their lives. So it wasn't really a question, but it was a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that.
And Mary Rayburn just said, hi, Mary Rayburn, King County. To hear new ideas, especially on investing in community through our contracting, ethnic media, gentrification plans, but how to make relationships building a recognized skill and time commitment.
And path
Thank you,
outreach
Mary.
efforts.
And Mary is for most of the people here in Western Washington and Eastern Washington know Mary Rayburn. She is a significant advocate and does a lot of work in King County to support these efforts with marginalized underserved, overburdened communities.
Great.
And then Anne is interested in off the beaten path outreach efforts. So innovative opportunities to engage with communities. And I can tell you that a number of the people in the attend environmental justice groups. The Stormwater Center hosts 2, and these are conversations they have all the time. Stormwater is primarily white community, and so a lot of people feel out of place when they walk in to these communities and want to know how to better respect them and not cause any harm as they enter communities with the efforts of meeting permit requirements.
Yeah, hi, I can jump in.
Mhm.
Just instead of typing it out. My name is Cha. Currently work for Skagit County. Been in their stormwater program for about 4 years now, but before that I did a number of years working in a different state of Minnesota, where I was pretty actively involved in environmental justice efforts as well. So it's always kind of been, it's always had, a special place in my heart to just stay involved. But I'm here today to, of course, listen to the presentations that you've prepared, and then what does community engagement mean to me? Well, from a stormwater professional standpoint, I grew up in like a rather poor part of town in Minnesota, and having become an adult, I've recognized the investments that go into particular neighborhoods and not so much into other neighborhoods. And the neighborhood I grew up in happened to be the latter, where not as many investments go in from like a green infrastructure standpoint. And so it kind of makes me sad to see that this is the reality we live in. And secondly, from the standpoint of the residents who are in marginalized communities, it's how do we get their engagement in terms of feeling invested? I'll dovetail off of I'm sorry, I forget your name, the first person who spoke up, but dovetail off of like the social and economic issues that he brought up. How do you go about getting people to feel invested if they're worrying about paying for rent, if they're worried about social justice issues they're facing? Why should they care about stormwater? So it's always been a question of mine. Hoping that we can have a conversation around that today.
Thank you, Cha.
Karimah, should we
So,
dive in?
well, I was just thinking, well, Cha and Paige kind of answered that question we were going to ask you all, and this should be a discussion instead of us just talking at you. So I'm appreciating, you all already starting to have these conversations, but maybe just we can spend just a little bit more time on what community engagement means to you all, and maybe you can just put it in the chat. If anyone else wants to share what that means. I like that Cha mentioned investment, because I think when I think about community engagement, I do want to empower marginalized communities to feel like that, they have a voice, and that, they can be equally invested in the community. So does anyone else have anything that they want to add? I see Stephanie says that Stephanie is interested in creating inclusive programs and communications.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
I can
Yeah.
speak up. So community engagement to me, I guess it kind of means lots of things, but it is engaging everyone in the community and meeting people where they're at, and recognizing that our community only gets stronger and richer when diverse viewpoints are brought in. So recognizing these marginalized, underserved communities as just an added strength to our community, that their voices are needed to kind of provide a framework and planning and all of that for something that works for everybody.
Thank you, Miriam. And I see Cameron has added giving people a voice and decision-making power, moving beyond educating, which I think speaks to outreach, right? We want to move beyond just outreach and actually have those connections. Chelsea says that she's here to learn. Coming from a state regulatory agency perspective, community engagement means connecting, listening, earning trust, and making sure community needs and priorities are reflected in decisions and actions that the agency takes. Thank you, Chelsea. And then Paige just wanted to reiterate that they agree with what Cha said. How do we make communities feel invested and included? Diane says, in the past, Stormwater has focused more on telling communities what we want them to know instead of listening to them about what their needs are and moving forward from there. Thank you, Diane.
That's a really good point, because engagement shouldn't just be one way.
One way. And
Yeah.
I love that, because as we're talking about those projects, Vinita, I feel like I'm learning all the time. And part of that does have to do with listening. And you all working in stormwater, I'm pretty sure someone has had an experience, or even if you work in government, which I worked in government for almost 30 years. And sometimes engagement is not pleasant. Sometimes people have very loud, passionate voices. And I had to learn to step back and say, why is this person so passionate or upset or even angry? So that I could understand the communities that I was serving more. So thank you all for providing that input.
There was one last comment. Cameron added in that it's also a way to build trust and relationships.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Cameron. So I really am not a big talker. I actually would be the one typing things in the chat. So if there's some folks that are like me, I like individual one-on-one, big groups. It's not my area, but I do like learning from folks and communicating. So if you all feel more comfortable talking in the chat, feel free to use that. And we'll just keep monitoring the chat. Cameron, what did you put in there? I can't see that.
Well, it's called the Citizens Participation Ladder. It's from an author, Arnstein. I learned about it in grad school, and it's all about the further you go up this ladder is kind of the more power and voice that you're giving to citizens. So a lot of times in those lower rungs of the ladder, when we're just educating and pushing out information, it can actually be seen as manipulation. And as you kind of move up that ladder, you're giving more and more control to the communities that you're working with and getting to some of these partnerships and delegated power. And then the top ladder is kind of like a citizen control, where they run the budgets, they make the decisions. So it's just always a goal of mine to keep moving up that ladder.
Thank you for sharing that. And it looks like someone else, Susan, has commented, how can we, through our work, support better outcomes for the community and the outcomes that they prioritize? That's really important. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. So we're going to start with a project that was special to me. And this was the Forest Trailhead Project at Woodland Park Zoo. You see the cute tree kangaroo there. It originally started as, it was called the Tree Kangaroo Project. And then we moved on from that. And ultimately it became the Forest Trailhead Project. If you've been to Woodland Park Zoo before, you might be familiar with the day-night exhibit that was there that unfortunately was lost in a fire. And so this project was rebuilding that space and reimagining it. And it was a really interesting project. Our firm was brought on to center historically, racially and socially marginalized communities. And so we took different approaches during this project that we'll talk about. But ultimately, one of the really cool things that happened in this project is we started to get some new perspectives on conservation and what that means in different communities, and how sometimes someone mentioned in the beginning about how, you know, it's more so about having these conversations instead of telling communities what they should do. That was one of the things that for me was a takeaway. It's not that communities aren't concerned about conservation or infrastructure or a lot of things that are happening in our world. It's sometimes we don't take the time to listen and understand that communities are doing things in the way that culturally, you know, they've done for years and decades and centuries. And so being able to understand that, you know, folks do things different ways, and being able to celebrate that and also to learn from that was a big part of this project. Anita, you can go to the next slide. So I have learned just from not just engagement, but just the different projects that I'm doing. We can't even begin to initiate projects without acknowledging historic harm to Indigenous communities and look at ways to restore Indigenous systems. So anytime we're talking about the land, we need to center Indigenous communities. So that was one of the things that I learned a lot and took a lot from with this project. We did have a team of Indigenous consultants that worked on this project, and we were able to work alongside that team with Headwater people. And I feel really honored because I was able to learn a lot and change some of my perspectives as we were going through this project. But looking at things more holistically, even you know, from the perspective of zoos and animals and the plants and the things that were going to make up this habitat, you know, not just looking at them as things. Like these are our non-human kinfolk, which is what I started to learn, and that goes for everything that's in the environment. How are we able to restore those systems and restore a different perspective of looking at that? I think that's important when we're doing any projects. So our firm always starts any project, whether it's planning with design work, whether it's strategic planning, whether it's programmatic planning, we start with a racial equity analysis. And that takes like really looking at demographic data. We try to get the most recent data. A lot of times we'll use like elementary school data because that's usually pretty fresh. And we'll look at, you know, the demographics from a racial, but also socioeconomic, linguistic perspective. So we know or have an idea of who we're actually serving, what communities we're serving, and what communities are being represented, not just around the project site, but from the community as a whole. So for Seattle, even though the zoo is, you know, in this location that is more predominantly white, more predominantly folks who have economic resources, we realize that the zoo should be a place, we realized with that project that the zoo should be a place that's inclusive and accessible for all people. So that was a component of our project that we we knew we would need to do some work on, just because of the location. And I'll talk a little bit more about demographics in the zoo. We also look at barriers. With the community engagement process, when I first started with Seattle, the city of Seattle, the way that community engagement was being done, and this was a long time ago, it was like these formal, super formal meetings. Maybe a handful of people attended. It was very homogenous when it came to who was actually showing up for these meetings. And we were kind of getting the same folks and the same input, and it became a place where people were making decisions for the wider community, the wider.
Okay.
And wider, both. And a lot of the community was being left out. So, you know, one of our strategies is to try and make these opportunities for engagement as accessible as possible. And then once we're looking at all of these different components, we use our findings to try and, you know, just guide our engagement strategy. But that being said, I feel like, you know, it's an iterative process because we're learning as we go. And I feel good about that because a lot of times we do have to pivot with community engagement. And to me, that shows that we're learning it from the community as we're going forward. Okay, it seems like we have some comments. Thank you, Mary. You already know. Community engagement involves finding common ground to support conversations on shared issues. Need to attend their community events, provide food. Thank you, Anne. Yes, Mary, it is the old school public meeting model, and I was just not going to do it. I wasn't doing it, and I'm glad that we've found ways to engage differently now, even though some people are still doing the old public meeting model.
Should I flip to your next slide, Karim?
Yes, please. So we took various methods of engaging with the community. We did work with the P-Patch BIPOC gardeners, and because we were doing something that had such a, you know, like environmental nature, the P-Patch gardeners were such a good resource, and they spoke to us from that lens of environmental justice, but also conservation. And we also worked with Parks and Recreation, which has always been phenomenal. I worked for Parks, and I know that the community centers can reach diverse communities in a whole range of diversity. And so that was a really good community resource for us. And then we did the barbershop one-on-ones, and there's a young man that is a consultant that works with us, and his name is Clarence Kitchens. He has a barbershop in Auburn, and he does free haircuts usually for the school year. And so it just so happened at that time he was doing the haircuts and was willing to engage with community members during the barbershop, the free haircut event. And it was really cool because here you are with, you know, whether it was a child or an adult, and they're getting their haircut, and it's such an intimate experience. And folks were just so willing to share their thoughts and ideas for this project. And it was really just a really, just really informative experience working with him on that. And we continue to do that because we get so much good information from folks. And it becomes something that Clarence was a person from the community that we knew, but it's become a relationship. And the folks that he still continues to work with and cut their hair, have begun to kind of familiarize themselves with this engagement process as well.
So another
So-
question for, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. We have another question. Just, thinking about the barber shop and, wanting to engage with people. Someone said meeting people where they are, but also, in those trusted spaces. I think one thing that I've learned is that, I can't do it all. There are spaces that, it's not appropriate for me to be in those spaces to engage. And a lot of times we will ask those trusted community members, we'll partner with trusted community members to engage with the community around them that they're familiar with. And so I think that makes for a richer experience. And even with Indigenous communities, empowering those communities to engage with people that are more familiar with them. So the question is, what are some spaces in your community that feel familiar and comfortable? And that can be anything, but it's really, an individual thing. What does that look like for you? So Stephanie says library, local parks, maybe the grocery store. Yeah, sometimes.
Not during rush hour when it's been.
Does anyone else want to share those spaces? Church, yes. Faith-based organizations have been a great way for us to partner. Community events, laundry facilities, that's a great one. Churches where appropriate. Local playgrounds, yep. Someone said urban trails. Spaces that include families and children, like a park or splash pad, community events. I'm glad you mentioned children because I think that sometimes those voices sometimes are overlooked when it comes to empowering communities. And I think that it serves so many different, it can hit so many different goals. And the reason I'm saying that is because, like, in the design world, Black and brown communities are very underrepresented. So it's an opportunity to build awareness for kids about this, careers, but also, to hear from them, because they come from, Vinita and I were talking, they come from such a very authentic place. And from a place where they're really willing to share. And I think that it just creates a better project, design, program when we hear from children. And then when you have children involved, the family becomes involved as well. So Cameron says, I hear so often rely on the trusted community partners. How do we do this on a regular basis without asking too much of them and being respectful of their time and effort? What are innovative ways to pay for these services? So that's a really good question. So when we start our budgets, and Vinita, you can speak to this too, I include budget for community. I feel like community time is valuable. I feel like it should be honored and respected. And when it comes to trusted community partners, we have to do the work to build those relationships. And it shouldn't be, to me, building a relationship with a community isn't just going to the same person over and over again, because then you're not really learning. That's just one group. So really trying to weave those relationships in the communities that we're serving takes work. And I think we have a responsibility if we're doing that work. Vinita, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can maybe vary if those community partners, and they definitely should be paid for their effort, are, hired directly by the agency, initially as part of starting that engagement effort, or part of your like larger consultant team where, you know, if you have an engagement consultant, to, you know, be clear that that is part of the team, or, you know, hopefully you're working
Right.
with someone great like Karimah and she's going to suggest that. But it's not necessarily more money, it's just allocating it in the right way.
Yeah, because we've given out zoo tickets too as well, but you know, demonstrating, you know, respect for folks' time, I think is important.
All right,
Let's see. Anne says organizations such as Boy and Girl Scouts. And then Stephanie said being reciprocal might be a good way to pay back for their time, like offering things they need or want. I agree with that, Stephanie. I also think like a lot of times we'll go to like already scheduled community events or like regular community events. And so we'll ask, you know, what can we do to support your events because you're supporting us. And as you're building that relationship, sometimes it does become like, well, something comes up with another partner and they need support down the road. And I love when that happens, when they come back to us and ask for that support. Vinita, you want to move forward?
Yeah.
Okay, so just really quickly, so we did a community-wide survey, and as you can see with this, which is such a, this has happened a couple of times with the projects with the zoo, the representation is predominantly white when we get survey responses. So what we started doing is looking at other ways to survey just historically marginalized communities, specifically BIPOC communities. And you can go to the next screen, Vinita.
Should we go to that? Or do you want to do the prompt? Yeah.
Well, I feel like we're running out of time.
Yeah, I
and
think we should keep going.
Yeah. So what we had started implementing is a micro survey, and a micro survey is a very small survey. It's usually just a few questions on one topic, and it takes a couple of minutes to answer. And so what that does is it helps us center the voices of BIPOC communities. And for this one, because it was the zoo, and the topic was really looking at forests and what forests mean to Black and Brown communities, we were able, because we have such a racially diverse, predominantly BIPOC firm, we were able to put surveys out to friends and family and folks that were already we were already engaged with because, you know, we're Black and Brown folks, and ask them questions about forest and what their thoughts were. And it really did help inform the design. Because of that, I think there's a space now in the Forest Trailhead project where there's a space for having these conversations about conservation and forest and things like that, because what we did here is people want to talk, like they want to talk and connect and have that opportunity at the zoo. Mary says using events as qualitative data opportunities. Absolutely. The qualitative data is what has been the most powerful thing. And just to your point, Mary, hearing people's stories, because people are really willing to share their own stories. And that really like forms for us with this project, formed the design. Okay, Vinita, it's all you. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. So I'm going to just start a little bit about, I think we've heard a lot of good things through the chat and from when you've unmuted that feels like a lot of you kind of get everything we're talking about already, but you're looking really for more tools and ideas and creative ideas. I was just going to touch briefly on what I feel like our work comes out best, and I'm sure you would feel this for the works that you do, your public work projects, infrastructure projects, stormwater projects, where it's really, there is a great community engagement process, and community driven really means that there's a communities are involved early, throughout, and then throughout the design phases, and then there is an outcome that results from that process. Not that you're just hearing for them and then you can check that off, but that actually that engagement was integral and meaningful to the end product of whatever that project is. And I just share these images. This top one I threw in here because maybe Karimah remembers this, but she and I worked on a project a long time ago. There's many ways to gather engagement, and she had this wonderful idea of putting up this chalkboard at a land-banked park site, and that asked a question about what people wanted in the park in lots of different languages. And there was some really, and left chalk handy, and there's some really wonderful thoughts that came out of that. And this project is moving forward, and there's a slide, so that's great. And then I mostly wanted to talk to you about a project I worked on in Wenatchee, in the south part of Wenatchee. I wanted to share this project because for me, it was probably one of the best experiences I had with engagement. It was a project that was led by the Trust for Public Land. And if you're not familiar with their urban park work, they're a great organization to look into. They have a lot of resources available on their website that are great tools. They do a really, they take their time before they do a project to really find where the gaps are in park needs. So they have a 10-minute walk from a park goal that everybody should live within a 10-minute walk from a park. And this was a neighborhood that they identified in South Wenatchee, not because there wasn't a park, but because the park was not serving the needs of the local community, which was a primarily Mexican immigrant community. It was, kind of your very basic park. From the city's point of view, the park director thought of it as kind of an unsafe neighborhood, and then thus they had things like big, really tall lighting and fencing at edges to prevent people from cutting through alleys and things like that. But it wasn't a place where people in the community went and hung out because they didn't really see it as serving their needs. When I got involved in the project, the Trust for Public Land had already been building their network for almost a year. And that was really made it so much better when the design team came in, because they had already created trust within the neighborhood. So when we started being part of engagement efforts, there was a community that was ready to come to the table. And the way they did that, because when they first started trying to have meetings and inviting people to meetings, nobody was showing up. As I mentioned, Mexican immigrant community, a lot of them worked picking fruit. There was a kind of inherent distrust, public agencies and authority. And what TPL ended up doing was they hired 2 local community members, an artist and a pastor, to help them with engagement. And they literally went door to door to people, talked to people they mostly already knew and some people they didn't, and told them about this project, and basically built trust so that people in that community started showing up, and that just made a huge difference. we thought it would be great to hear from you, if all of you, about, have you given thought on how different ways to build that network in the communities you serve, or have you, what are things maybe you have done or have you thought about?
Vinita, I'm gonna go to the chat too.
Okay.
Mary asked a question. Do everyone's park design teams now include design for disability audiences of all ages? I can't speak for everyone's, but I do feel like universal design is something that folks have more of an awareness of. And so not just thinking of things from the perspective of, just doing things that meet the needs of people with disabilities, but thinking of it from a holistic perspective, like how can we make something that works for everyone? And so I like that we're moving in that direction a lot more. Paige said, this is just across the river from me. I remember when this park was being made over, such a wonderful transformation and a gift for the community. Bill says, oh, thanks, Bill. Bill has to leave. It says, Miriam recommends volunteer with the community as a person with no agenda. Yeah, I think one of the things about building a network is that it takes time. Like Vinita, to your point, the folks that you partnered with had done the work like for a year before you all ever started the design process. And I think that's, it does take time to build that network.
Stephanie has her hand up. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just gonna say maybe a way to build that network is to just show up to the events they have like going on. Like, I'm trying to get connected more with some of the tribes. So, maybe I should show up to like their powwows or, just like all their community. I, try to follow their calendar of events, and that's something I would like to try to do more, is just try to show up to those events that they're hosting themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to keep going, but keep putting things in the chat if more thoughts come up. I would think that maybe many of you are already thinking this way, but there's a lot of different ways to do engagement, as Karimah showed too. With, I never would have thought of having a barber be part of your engagement process, but it makes total sense because you're sitting there, the captive audience, and you always, they're usually really good people to talk to. But in this project in Wenatchee, we had meetings in a lot of different forms and a lot of different sizes. And one thing that was really successful was just being in the park for a long time, and just allowing people to come to you. Having when you do have a meeting, having food is just so helpful, and not just like I don't know, some bad chips, but like an actual healthy meal that someone would be able to sustain them through a 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. meeting or a lunchtime meeting or whatever it is. And there was really good Mexican food at all these meetings. I ate really well at meetings, and also thinking about kind of other things that could be and I'm not necessarily going to have a good direct idea that might apply to stormwater here, but there were things that we as designers wanted feedback on, and so we figured out ways to just really directly get those prompts. Like, for example, one element of this park was they wanted a place, what's called a kiosco, that they could use for performances, both dance and music. And we did an exercise of actually like trying to right size it on the site as we were designing and working with community members for them. They, you know, actually just went out there and started dancing and, you know, got figured out if we were getting it right. And we also like to really think about creating ways that make it different types of ways to give feedback or to engage. That sometimes tactile activities are really good, especially for kids. You know, think about different abilities. You know, there was a comment about before about disability. I think that's not just about design for people with disabilities, but how do you engage with people that have are on all different parts of the spectrum, as we all are, and might be able to communicate better in different ways. So we created these kind of block-like things that were really fun for the kids and just was a way for them to feel comfortable. And once they were comfortable, their parents were talking to us, and that was all just led to really good conversations. You know, we got some great ideas and drawings, and we also just like walked the neighborhood and had some fun ideas from people that wanted. There was an alley next to the park, and people really were interested in how can we improve this alley and plant flowers and murals and things like that. We showed up at events that were already happening. So this was a place, I've done this a lot, where you just set up a booth at an existing event that you know the people you want to talk to are going to be at. Because even if they can only come by for 5 minutes, you can have a really meaningful interaction in that time, and that comes away with some great, you know, takeaways that you can use to make your project better. All right, our next question for all of you. Workshops can serve as an opportunity to connect with community members. What are some ways to make meaningful connections when taking part in a workshop? Yeah.
As people are thinking about that question, I just want to go back to something you mentioned, Vinita, when you were talking about having meals and like some of your ways you were engaging were culturally responsive. And I think that's an important consideration to have with any community that you're engaging with, you know, making sure that you're learning from the community what would be, you know, appropriate for their culturally appropriate. And I also think there's a certain, like, you know, it's nice to have things, you know, that take the burden off the community, like having a meal. But I also think, like, you know, for a lot of cultures, a meal is something that does foster connection. I know for me as an African American woman, like when you sit down and you have a meal with someone, you're really like intentionally connecting. So I think that was an important piece that you mentioned.
It can also, I worked on a park project here in Seattle called Pathways Park, and there was a community group that was kind of led the initiative, and then it was also a Seattle Parks project. But they were always very intentional about supporting a good local business too and providing food. So there was this business called Free Lard Tamales that was, yeah, had tamales a lot, and they were great. And
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think, you know, we do want to continue to sow into the community, and not just take, you know, I mean, that's that relationship building part. Paige says that in response to the question, ask thoughtful, sincere questions, bring business cards, and suggest a follow-up chat or email. That's great. Anne says, ask questions, find common ground around kids, sports, animals before you share your agenda. Bring something. Yeah, like really like having conversations, not just launching into, you know, we want something. Thank you, Anne.
I would say too that there was always Spanish translations on anything that was printed for that group. I mean, you need to know your audience and who you're reaching, and that language need could be very different in different places. So, but yeah, that type of accessibility is also, of course, important. And I, I always like to say, if you can make engagement fun, make it fun, because then it doesn't actually feel like a burden. It just feels like doing the kind of thing you want to do anyway, and you're making community and TPL organized like really great events in the park before the project was improved, and that had dance performances and mariachi performances, engaged with the local high school. This is like actually a mariachi band at the local Wenatchee high school, and they were just really excited to also be able to share their ideas in a meaningful way. We and I put in this photo of cherries because the community eventually really did trust us, and they were very appreciative. And I went to one community meeting where they had just picked a lot of cherries because that's where they worked, and they just showed up with an extra box of cherries and gave it to us, and that was just really like felt good.
Yeah, that's
Like
beautiful.
sharing food, like you said, that's just like the gift of food, and having food with each other can be a really special thing.
Yeah, it's such a connection. Mary also added hire local interpreters for two-way learning and surveys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then one just little design detail that I wanted to share that came out of the engagement, because you've asked about outcomes. There were a couple different artists that eventually became part of the team, and this a lot of community members had a lot of interest in what was called papel picado, which is this paper cutting tradition in Mexican community, and you'd see these hanging a lot in different places. And they were also really interested in telling the story of the fruit grown in the Wenatchee Valley, of apples harvest, and the story of migration. And so there was a whole series of cut metal panels that went into a fence that was partly a safety measure for the edges of the play area. But these different panels told these different stories that came out of the engagement process, including, the harvesting of apples. And that was just that was a very clearly direct connection to, things that we heard, but it adds a lot of richness to the project.
Cool.
And those are all the slides we have, and we really went almost our full time already. But if there were a couple more thoughts or last questions, we have a couple minutes.